support is given.
We're now coming to the statement. Can I call the Secretary of State for Transport?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement about international travel. It's less than 2 months since the first cases of Omicron were confirmed in the UK, the most infectious variant to emerge since the start of the pandemic. But thanks once again to the nationwide army of medical staff and volunteers and the huge public response to the booster programme, today, with over 137 million jabs administered, including nearly 37 million boosters, Britain is now one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, and Omicron is in retreat. And thanks to the decisions that were taken by the Prime Minister, we've managed to turn the tide on the virus in remarkable time, whilst keeping our domestic society one of the most open in the world. Today, I can confirm to the House, Mr. Speaker, that our international travel regime will also now be liberalised as part of our efforts to ensure that 2022 is the year in which restrictions on travel, on lockdowns and limits on people's lives are firmly placed in the past. Mr. Speaker, from 4 a.m. on the 11th of February, and in time for the half-term break, eligible fully vaccinated passengers arriving in the UK will no longer have to take a post-arrival lateral flow test. And that means that after months of pre-departure testing, post-arrival testing, self-isolation, additional expense, all that fully vaccinated people will now have to do when they travel to the UK is to verify their status via a passenger locator form. And Mr. Speaker, we promised we wouldn't keep these measures in place a day longer than was necessary, and it's obvious to me now that border testing for vaccinated travellers has outlived its usefulness, and we're therefore scrapping all travel tests for vaccinated people. Not only making travel much easier, but also, of course, saving about £100 per family on visits abroad, providing certainty to passengers, to carriers and vital tourism sector for the spring and the summer seasons. And so, Mr. Speaker, let me explain to the House how this will actually work in practice. For now, we'll maintain our current definition of fully vaccinated for the purposes of inbound travel to the UK. And that means 2 doses of an approved vaccination or 1 dose of a Janssen vaccine. And we'll go further. The measures for those arriving in the UK who do not qualify as fully vaccinated have not changed since last March. So the time has come to review that position too. And today I can announce that passengers who do not qualify as fully vaccinated will no longer be required to do a day 8 test after arrival or indeed to self-isolate. They will still need to fill out a passenger locator form to demonstrate proof of a negative COVID test taken 2 days before they travel, and they must still take a post-arrival PCR test. This is a proportionate system that moves us a step closer to normality while maintaining vital public health protections. Now, for kids travelling to the UK, under 18s will continue to be treated as eligible, fully vaccinated passengers, which means they will not face any tests at the UK border. And today, I'm pleased to confirm that from February the 3rd, 12 to 15-year-old in England will be able to prove their vaccination status via the digital NHS pass for international outbound travel. Again, this should help families plan holidays for February half-term. And Mr. Speaker, reconnecting with key markets, not only to boost the UK economy, but will also help hard-hit aviation sector to take back to the skies. So I can also confirm that from 4 a.m. on the 11th of February, we'll recognise at the UK border vaccine certificates from 16 further nations, and that will include countries like China and Mexico, bringing the vaccine recognition total to over 180 countries and territories worldwide. Mr. Speaker, one of the consequences of COVID and a rapidly changing infection patterns across the world has been the border regime that, while necessary, has at times been complex and confusing and very difficult to navigate. I know that it's been something of a challenge for many people who have been travelling over the last 2 years. So we're also going to simplify the passenger locator form, making it quicker and easier to complete. And from the end of February, we'll also make it more convenient by giving people an extra day to fill out the form before they travel. And whilst the option for a red list of countries will remain in place to provide a first line of defence against future COVID variants of concern arriving from other countries, we are looking to replace the managed quarantine system with other contingency measures, including home isolation, provided we can develop new ways to ensure high levels of compliance. In the meantime, our contingency measures remain available, and as the House knows, there are no countries on the red list currently. But I must make clear, they are only likely to be used, these contingency measures will only be applied if we are particularly concerned about a variant of concern that poses a substantial risk, one which is even greater than Omicron, in other words. Now, the UK Health Security Agency will continue to monitor threats and will maintain a high, effective surveillance capacity, monitoring COVID infections overseas. But I can announce today that over time, we intend to move away from blanket border measures to a more sophisticated and targeted global surveillance system. I'm also committing today to develop a full toolbox of contingency options to provide more certainty on how we respond against future variants. The government will set out our strategy, including how we'll deal with any new and future new strains of the virus next month, and we'll continue to work with international partners, including the World Health Organization, to help all countries achieve a level of genomic sequencing to monitor variants which is much closer to our own world-leading capacity. Mr. Speaker, we're moving into a new phase of the fight against COVID. Instead of protecting the UK from a pandemic, our future depends on us living with endemic COVID, just as we live with flu, for example. So we'll set out our strategy for that transition this spring. But as we navigate our recovery and as we return to more normal travel next month, our advice to all eligible adults who have not been vaccinated stays the same. Please get jabbed as soon as possible. And if you've had 2 jabs, please get boosted. Now, I've been speaking, Mr. Speaker, to a lot of my opposite numbers around the world recently, and they've made clear to me that regardless of what we do, they are very likely to require the booster jab by this summer. And so my advice to anyone who wishes to travel this year, including during the summer, is don't leave it too late to get your booster. You're very likely to be required it by the third country that you're flying to. Mr. Speaker, we already have one of the most open economies and societies in Europe, with the result being that our GDP has outpaced that of other G7 countries. With these changes today, we've one of the most open travel sectors in the world. Of course, we know that COVID can spring surprises, but everybody now should feel confident about booking holidays, business trips and visits to family and friends abroad. But be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, it's only because the government got the big calls right. On vaccination, on boosters, on dealing with Omicron. And we can now open travel and declare that Britain is open for business. Today, we are setting Britain free, Mr. Speaker, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Louise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of today's statement. Mr. Speaker, the aviation industry is a critical part of the UK economy, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs across the UK. But both the haphazard approach and the refusal of the government to grant sector-specific support has caused it real damage. The UK's aviation sector has experienced a slower recovery than any of our European counterparts and has experienced over 60,000 job losses by summer last year. And it is baffling that the government did not do more to support this as a strategic sector and potentially attach conditions for transition to net zero, as countries like France and Germany have done. Too often, the government's indecisive and chaotic approach to each wave of COVID infections has failed to keep the country safe, while causing uncertainty for the travelling public and for business. Each time a new variant has emerged, the government has taken a different approach to border controls and restrictions. We all want to see safe international travel and the protection of public health, and that's precisely why the public finally deserve to hear in full how ministers intend to develop a comprehensive, easily understandable plan to ensure that can happen in the months ahead. We must avoid the sheer absurdity of the Secretary of State announcing one set of restrictions before promptly scrapping that and announcing a completely different regime. Businesses and the public should have clarity about what changes the government will likely make in the event of a new variant, not have to wait until 5 p.m. on a Saturday night for new measures that are required on a Monday morning. That is why it's welcome the government will finally produce a plan to allow the travel industry and the public the certainty they need. And why we have recently outlined our plan on the action needed to learn to live well with COVID and protect lives, livelihoods and help avoid harsh restrictions in future waves. That is critical when it comes to the travel industry. It is, as the Secretary of State has said, inevitable another variant of concern will emerge. With Omicron, the plan the government had produced was upended, proving it was simply not fit for purpose. The government must learn these lessons and outline a framework to guide future decision-making and detect future variants. So when the Secretary of State publishes his plan, will he include the data which will guide the approach to future variants and detail the economic, well-being and equality impact of each scenario? And given the Health Secretary said only last week that testing will remain part of our walls of surveillance, does he agree we should build up the UK's sovereign capability to ensure we always have a supply of tests when we need them? And has he considered the merits of a surveillance system to detect possible future variants? Last month, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State confirmed to me he would raise mine and the CMA's concerns around the PCR market with the Health Secretary. Can he update the House on what progress he has made on cleaning up that market for future travellers? Mr. Speaker, and I'd be grateful if the Secretary of State could confirm if the passenger locator form will be available in other languages in the future. Mr. Speaker, today's announcement is also a visible reminder of another stark truth, that in an era of global international travel, no one is safe until everyone is safe. In the UK, we have learned that lesson the hard way. If we are going to break this endless cycle of new variants, we have to vaccinate the world. Yet ministers simply haven't met the commitments that were made this summer at the G7 to get the vaccine rolled out to other parts of the globe and instead cut the overseas aid budget. So can the Secretary of State outline what steps his government is taking to deliver on those measures committed to at the G7? Mr. Speaker, living with COVID cannot just be an empty slogan with no plan. That's why we need to properly prepare and protect our lives and livelihoods in the future. It's time ministers finally gave passengers, industry and communities the security and stability they deserve.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, thanks very much to the Honourable Lady for welcoming, I think, the statement today. I understand that she hasn't been in the post very long, but she'll be aware that her predecessors have simultaneously both called for us to tighten up and close the borders whilst simultaneously relaxing and opening them, and often on the same day or a few days apart from each other. But I understand that she's recently come to the post, but there is something that she can do current day, and that is, if she doesn't mind me suggesting, that she may be able to speak to her Welsh Labour governmental counterparts who are a constant drag on opening up aviation, and I hear that she's very keen that we do move ahead with this plan today. I hope she'll be able to assist in persuading them to always move a little bit more promptly. She quite rightly says that we need to have a toolbox in order to respond. And as explained mentioned in the statement, she's absolutely right about that. I do think that we need a toolbox going forward. I don't think it's just a question for the UK. I was talking to the Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency this morning, who herself sits and co-chairs a World Health Organization body which is working exactly on this global response. And I think one of the most important things which may have been missed during my statement is just to stress that we believe the time is right to move from individuals being checked as they come over our border, as we know that whatever the variant eventually it gets in, and every country has found that, to a global system of surveillance, which is, if you like, every bit as good as we have here in the UK, where world leading is applied often, but we genuinely have a world leading version of surveillance through the amount of coronavirus testing that we can do with genome sequencing, and we're helping other countries in the world through practical application to catch up with that as well. She asks about what the government is doing to honour our bid made at the G7 and elsewhere with coronavirus. And I just want to sort of gently point out and mention to the House, In developing AstraZeneca, Oxford developed a vaccine which has been used in more arms than any other vaccine in the world. I think I'm right in saying the figure's about 2.5 billion people who've been vaccinated with that. And that is a huge contribution in addition to all of the COVAX and other donations that we've made, and we will continue to do so. Mr. Speaker, I think I'm pleased to hear that the whole House is welcoming this particular plan today to unlock and to set Britain free.
We go to the Chair Select Committee. Hugh Merriman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Not only is this announcement today another example of us living with COVID, it's also a landmark day for international travel, a sector that has been absolutely decimated over the last couple of years. And with this news, this surely is the evidence they need that people should now feel confident to book with certainty. Can I ask the Secretary of State, with that in mind, to ensure that there is a culture across Whitehall that if there are bumps in the road, that international travel is not the sector that has to be made an example of, and that we will continue to support international travel and all those fantastic people who work within it?
State.
So I think that my honourable friend's absolutely right about this. As we've learnt more about this pandemic, as it becomes endemic, it's of course quite right that our response should be different. And I mentioned a moment ago about shifting from individual testing at the border to a global system of testing. So I do give him that commitment. We're looking to now work within a new toolbox which will help to set out a framework. We will always act quickly, of course, if we have to, but I believe the days of having to go back to these big kind of lockdowns at the borders are past.
We come to SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we have an announcement on coronavirus restrictions being made to the press before being made to Parliament. So, while the Government, and in particular this Secretary of State, desperately try to save the Prime Minister's skin with announcements such as this, or the removal of Plan B restrictions generally, Parliament is repeatedly cut out of the loop as the Government throw out policies to placate their base. But we have reached the Omicron peak a little earlier than projected. Indeed, today in Scotland, nightclubs can reopen while the caps on indoor events, table service requirements for venues selling alcohol and social distancing are removed also. But as I heard the Secretary acknowledge, these revised requirements will apply to England only. So can I first ask what discussions he's had with colleagues in devolved administrations about the measures in his statement today, and how those discussions have factored into his decision? In previous changes to travel regs, the devolved administrations were consulted very late and not given adequate time to look over the data and announce a decision simultaneously. And while he proposes to remove the requirement to test on arrival, he will also surely accept that regular lateral flow testing is still imperative in terms of identifying and tracing cases more generally and allowing everyone to travel safely. So what representations has he made to his colleagues in ensuring LFTs remain free on request for everyone, regardless of income? And can you tell us a bit more? It's been asked about, and I don't think he asked about it. What mechanism of monitoring possible new variants will be put in place now that the testing is no longer in place itself? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the aviation industry is still in the same position when it comes to the sector-specific support promised by this government nearly 2 years ago. The impact of COVID on travelling patterns and customer behaviour won't end with this statement today. So what plan does he have to fulfil the promises made to the sector at the start of the pandemic for real targeted government support? The job retention scheme wasn't enough for 3,000 people in my constituency who lost their jobs, Mr. Speaker. All those who faced fire and rehire by companies such as Menzies Aviation and British Airways.